Hey, good morning, everyone. So I'm going to talk to you about what I think are the most essential dilemmas of our time, and I'm going to try to convince you to care, and then I'm going to try to convince you that DeFi, all of the talent in this building, all of the talent in this room, the infrastructure and business models you guys and girls are creating are actually a core part of our next iteration in commodities. So, without further ado, let's get into commodities and what that actually means. My name's Maryam. Until about 2 years ago, I ran origination and investments for Shell Trading, looking after global crude oil products and environmental products growth, as well as everything we ever did in blockchain and infrastructure in that space. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about is born out of that experience and the opportunities we saw at being able to scale beyond the closed ecosystems we were then creating. Looks like we found the deck we wanted to talk about. Let's talk about commodities and what it is and why I think you should care. For those of you who don't know, it is literally the bedrock of our global economy. We talked about growing crypto to 19 trillion, 20 trillion, 30 trillion. We do that by becoming relevant to the real world assets that need to move, the supply chains that are consumption, finances, and fuels. Everything from agriculture, thinking about food security and the water you're drinking, the bottles the water is in, the energy that's keeping all the lights on, the metals that power every transition we need to electrification, cobalt, copper, lithium ion for the batteries, aluminum. All of that comes from mining energy resources. And so the question really is, do we play a role in getting that to a place that's more efficient, more ethically sourced and friction-free, and then bundling that with a carbon economy and a voluntary carbon market that really needs to come into play to help us achieve a more sustainable future while continuing to grow the prosperity that resources bring to us. Does that make sense to anybody? I want to see some nods. There we go, I got 3 nods. Big words, defining dilemmas of our time. I think it's really important in rooms like this to consider the power and potential our work can have in some of the really big dilemmas of our time. If you think about war, the frictions in all of our supply chain post-pandemic, and climate change, and the need to do something about that, that trifecta of dilemmas has really highlighted the scarcity in our resource supply chains and our essential resources, while we're seeing consumers, shareholders, corporates, organizations actually care more and more about the environmental, social, and governance footprint of what it is we consume and what it is financiers finance. What does that mean? That means, how do you make sure that the laptop you're using doesn't have conflict aluminum on it, doesn't come from child labor, that the lithium ion that is fueling all of the batteries you're using has a footprint you can live with, right? And that transparency isn't there today. And so there's a huge gap in financing commodities, which then exacerbates the fact that the costs are going up and the supply chains are disrupted. Today there is a $1.5 trillion gap in financing commodities. 1.5 trillion. That's probably bigger than much of what we're looking at today in tackling in this room. And that gap really comes from the inability to match provenance and ethics and especially governance compliance with the supply chains that are being financed. So financiers are pulling away, and there's just a shortcome of capital because it's getting more and more expensive. It's resulting in a commodity price soar, which means all of the large energy companies, mining companies of this world are having record profits while prices are going up and the rest of the market's crashing. Those are really interesting dilemmas to think about. And from my vantage point of having sat on the other side of the table for so long, my team likes to say decades. It's not true. I'm not actually that old. But for having sat on the commodities side of this ecosystem for so long and looking at what this world does, in 2016, I co-founded some of the very first industry coalitions that leveraged blockchain for post-trade processing of Brent crude oil, for trade finance, etc. Those launched to majority shares in the markets we targeted, which is huge if you think about it, $17 trillion, Brent crude, etc. And so if you look at that and you look at what's happening, the potential in this room, the potential in DeFi, and the gaps in commodities and the new business models, it's evident that we're in a moment that's once in a generation. There's an opportunity to bridge those worlds, to bring them together, and build industry-defining coalitions. What does that mean? We've been working for the last 2 years to build what we call the digital commons for ethical commodities. Digital commons because we want you to think about the physical commons you think of when you go to a park or something that's community-owned, community-led, but really for the greater good. In this case, it's also for profit, so let's not forget that part of it, because we need to incentivize the best talent and all the best organizations and entrepreneurs to come and build for a triple bottom line outcome: people, planet, and profit. So the digital commons for ethical commodities, ethical, not that we tell you what is good, there's nothing centralized about this, ethical in that we empower an ecosystem of developers, dApps, and organizations to start to self-define in a sovereign manner what they believe the values are they want to consume. So for example, you might care about child labor in the Congo. That should drive what electric car you buy. You might not know that today. You might care about women being abused in a certain country. That should make an impact on which gas station you pull into. You might not know that today. So how might we create the transparency so individuals, organizations, and governments can make the decisions they want to based on their values? The commons that we are building start with infrastructure. It's a layer 1 protocol called Watr protocol. We're open, we're public. We have some amazing partners. We are built in Polkadot. We're a Polkadot parachain in partnership with Parity Technologies, who really are helping us work through all of the development, the technology, and the R&D required to bridge the world of enterprise and retail in a safe but open space. We also have co-founding partnerships from Trust Token, who are the creators of the first US dollar-backed stablecoin, and the creators of TrueFi, which is a DeFi lending protocol on Ethereum, and I'll talk about how that helps us do what we want to do. And we also have industry giants who are our partners and co-founders, although I'm not allowed to mention names here. But that merging of worlds allows us to build the basic infrastructure. For us, it's all of the stuff you see here, but the thing to really call out is that the first-class citizen on Watr protocol is identity, decentralized identity to allow individuals, organizations, and assets to accrue sovereign identity through a whole series of exercises they choose to undertake. So should you come onto Watr and decide to be KYC'd, your identity will carry that complication. Should you decide to go and be a participant in a liquidity pool, your identity will carry the performance you've had in those liquidity pools. You can opt out of that, it's fully sovereign, but should you choose to use it, what you're doing is bridging and creating interoperable identity for assets, individuals, and organizations across the dApps of the ecosystem. That's a huge piece for us to tackle when we're trying to bring regulated industry on-chain. If you want to buy and sell cobalt and aluminum or trade it on-chain, the ability to make sure those who need it are able to have KYC AML and those who do not want it are able to opt out of that activity and still maintain the public openness of a public chain. So identity is really big for us, selective privacy, so that we can have trade execution on chain. And all of this really leads to a world where commodities are tokenized and programmable. What do we mean by programmable? We mean that we should be able to get, in the next months, to a place where you're no longer talking about physical commodities as if they're fungible. They're not, right? Like I mentioned, copper and a cobalt produced with a certain footprint, whether that's environmental, social, or governance, in a geography that you want to consume from, or in a geography you don't want to consume from, those aren't fungible. And I'm sitting in a room full of people who understand what's possible when you start to tokenize and create non-fungible assets, and you trade, buy, sell them with decentralized exchangeability within regulated guardrails. There's a really crazy cool world ahead. And if you can convene the giants of trade and industry, and you can convene this world, you fundamentally have created an ecosystem of visibility. Visibility in that we can now see what it is our consumption finance is, and we can participate in our version of good without creating any more centralized intermediaries. Over time, and even more immediately, you're creating financial inclusion through decentralized finance and liquidity. You're creating that by the ability to A, have people participate in the economy who are otherwise left outside of commodities. Today, none of you, unless you're a broker, can participate in the commodity market. But also, you cannot finance activities that you want to finance without going through centralized intermediaries. In a decentralized world, all of that is possible and much more inclusive. I want to give you a couple examples of what this means so you don't think I'm talking theory and 5 years from now. These aren't stock photos. These are photos of farms that we are co-financing at the foundation in Nigeria. Farm Crowdy, one of our partners, is a farm to export provider of crowd loans for Nigerian farmers. For the last 6 years, they've been providing funding to buy seeds and then pre-purchasing the produce of a farm and getting it to the market before it rots. For any of you who care about food security, about 50% of the subsistence farmers in Nigeria today throw away their food because it never makes it to the supply chain. The waste is immense. Think about what I said about the lack of food security. Marry those two and get it right. You're changing the world and the lives of the farmers as much as you are high-grading African and Nigerian agriculture to be able to service food security and fill the gap left by others due to war. Agric is another one of our partners. They're a spin-out of Kobo360, which is basically Uber Freight in Nigeria. With Agric, we're financing from warehouse to export of agriculture from Nigeria. Again, you're bringing digitized efficiency, but all of this is going on the TrueFi lending pools, and there are going to be liquidity pools set up to service financing of this. So when one thinks about how might we drive a real-world asset economy on chain, I would want you to consider this because it's immediately impactful. It allows you, your capital, and all of our capital to do good while earning a profit. None of this is charitable. It is incredibly lucrative, but it is also removing inefficiencies and creating profit in those inefficiencies. Another example of the work we're doing is around environmental products and bringing the voluntary carbon market on chain. We'll announce 8 a.m. New York time today that Flow Carbon is one of our foundation partners in our voluntary carbon ecosystem. For those of you who don't know, the voluntary carbon market today is about anywhere between $2 to $10 billion. It needs to grow fivefold between now and 2030 to allow industry, miners, energy companies, trading houses, food suppliers to meet their emissions reductions goals that they have made to their shareholders and investors. It needs to grow fivefold. How is it going to do that in the next 7 years? Yesterday, I was speaking in a panel with the mining companies and energy companies, and I was inviting them to come across the city and meet you guys and girls, because the talent shortage on that side of the world and the opportunity shortage on that side of the world needs to be bridged by the decentralized talent, the open source developer community, and the dApps in this room so that we can make this challenge come to life. It is the biggest existential dilemma of our time, and every piece of DeFi was made to tackle this. Tokenized carbon credits are the only way to be able to get that intimacy to source that we need to make the voluntary carbon market come to life. We're also announcing a hackathon and a developer program for the VCM on Watr with Flow. So if you want to be involved, come find me or any one of our team and reach out. We'd love to have you help us build this out. And finally, really this is a call to action. These potatoes, by the way, are financed by DeFi, so we should all be pleased. But there's a crisis all around us, and I want you to think about that as the opportunity that I'd love every one of you to rise to and help us build this future, help us build a future to live in. And thank you.